Straight ahead, the big issues in this new year. We'll discuss the pending changes facing Texas, from border security to the property taxes you pay to public schools and school choice. We'll speak with two political reporters at the Texas Capitol. Speaker battle. We'll also discuss the race for House Speaker between two Republicans, Representatives David Cook and Dustin Burrows, and that race continues to heat up. And primary fight. Will Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton challenge Senator John Cornyn next year? It's already being discussed. Good morning, I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics starts now. Hello and Happy New Year, and welcome to a special edition of Eye on Politics. As we begin 2025, big issues are facing Texas, with President-elect Donald Trump set to start his second term in office in about 2 weeks. And the start of the next legislative session next week, there will be changes to border security, taxes, and public education and school choice. I discussed this with two political reporters based at the Texas Capitol, Brad Johnson, senior reporter of the Texan, and Jasper Scherer, politics reporter at the Texas Tribune. We began with border security.
I think, the folks in charge of the Texas legislature have been pretty clear over the last 4 years, the last couple budget cycles, where they've been pouring money into border security, that their preference would be to not have to devote such a sizable chunk of the budget to that cause. And they have talked about, I know Governor Abbott has talked about trying to recoup some of that money from the federal government even. I'm not holding my breath for that, even under unified Republican control in Congress. I think that would be a heavy lift, but it sounds like, at least initially, Governor Abbott and some Republicans have signaled openness to spending less on border security. I think Governor Abbott has said that he expects to, still spend some amount. The state, even before Biden took office, was spending around $800 million every 2 years on sort of a less aggressive form of border enforcement prior to Operation Lone Star. So it's reasonable to expect something. I think Abbott has said, just while Trump ramps up his policies, it's not going to be an overnight thing. So he expects Texas will still pour some money into it. But if they're spending, that they've spent around $5 billion, $6 billion over the last 2 years, that's, billions that could go towards property tax cuts, public education spending, maybe even an education savings account program. So there's going to be a lot of hands kind of competing for this for the cookie jar for the budget surplus. And I think the Republican leaders will be eager to put that elsewhere, as long as they can do it without looking like they're being soft on the border or anything like that.
Brad.
Yeah, Jasper's exactly right. The budget surplus is estimated to be about $21 billion next year, and that's about $10 billion less than they had last biennium, or the current biennium. So any money that does get freed up because of the Trump administration's increased presence at the border will allow that to go elsewhere for various other fights. The water fight is going to be a big one this year as well. But I'm also curious to see what policy they decide to either revisit or implement or visit in the first place. The Border Protection Unit went down in a blaze of glory last year at a point of order at a midnight deadline. People forget, that was a priority of Speaker Dade Phelan. And it had the blessing of leadership, I guess, until it died by a point of order. But is that something that gets revisited? Is that something that Texans feel the need to revisit, given the presumed fact that the Trump administration and Border Patrol will increase their resources on the border? And the other factor is, of course, the human element. If the Trump administration does increase its presence there, that allows a lot of Texans serving in the Texas military and DPS on the border to come home and not have to spend any more time there than they already have.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you brought up the Border Protection Unit, and I saw a bill, I believe it was filed by Briscoe Cain down in the Houston area, calling for a border protection unit.
An explicit part of the aim of the border protection unit as it was envisioned last regular session. Matt Schaefer, the East Texas Republican who was kind of spearheading that effort in the House, he said in a committee hearing that essentially the goal was to create sort of a permanent force so that the state wouldn't be relying on sort of this ad hoc solution where the essentially the National Guard is not meant to serve as this permanent force where a lot of these folks have jobs that they're stepping away from for months at a time, from families. They were not intending to do this.
We've got a lot of topics, so I want to move on and talk a little bit about public education. Governor Abbott has said he's got the votes to pass school choice. The big question is that really true? Brad, what do you think of that?
I think on the very basis, yes, it's there. But as always, the devil's in the details. And there's going to be a fight over not just how much money to allot to this, but the accountability measures to tie to it. What do we do with STAR testing? I heard Dustin Burrows, candidate for speaker, say this might be a session where we eliminate STAR testing. And that kind of runs into a problem when we're talking about a negotiated deal on school choice and education savings accounts. Where do you go from there on that? What other measures do you implement? How do you prioritize who gets these ESAs? And we're just going to have to face the fact, I think, that you're going to have to tie it to a very large amount of money given to public schools through school finance program and into teacher pay. We saw that last year, and that didn't pass. I don't see the ball having moved enough yet to pass a standalone ESA bill. This is going to be the subject of a massive debate, not just in the Senate, but not just in the House, but also the Senate.
To be clear, heading into this session, the idea of school vouchers, education savings accounts has more momentum than it has ever had in at least in recent memory in Texas, maybe ever. I think there is a degree of reluctance, maybe even fear on the part of some of the House members who might have traditionally considered voting the other way. They just don't want to get on Governor Abbott's bad side. They've seen the lengths he's willing to go to get what he wants on this issue. But that said, it seems like a fairly slim pro education savings account majority in the House. Abbott's estimated whip count is around 79 votes, which lines up with what I'm seeing. But I think that's 3 or 4 votes of wiggle room there, where if you introduce a school choice bill that 4 of those those members can't get on board with, then you introduce a provision to placate them. You get those holdouts on board. Maybe that new provision gets 4 others off the train. So I think it is still it could be finicky.
The next real question, I think, is what is the impact going to be on this debate over public education altogether? Because the Senate passed separate legislation the last time, and then the House tried to get it through with this just enormous bill with school choice and increases to public education. And obviously, that didn't work either. So how is this all going to shake out?
If a school finance bill reaches Governor Abbott's desk, he could very easily still say, I'm not touching this thing until you send me a voucher ESA bill. So I think it's, there's no way to fully decouple this conversation. I think there are some folks who want to see an education savings account bill pass, who are still, I don't know if they would be reluctant to support it without public school funding, but they are at least equally adamant about seeing raises for teachers and that kind of stuff. So it's I think the takeaway for me is that it's impossible to completely decouple these 2 issues.
I think maybe they try and start with separate bills, but I don't see it ending up there, at least in the House. The political realities are still pretty difficult for something like that to get passed. And Obviously, as I said, who knows what the actual details of these accountability measures are, and that's going to determine a lot. If they can strike a balance on that, they may be able to get this across the line on its own. I think they're going to have to eventually tie this to a very large school funding increase, not just for the next biennium, but for the one that failed the last time, along with teacher pay. It's just, I'm not sure that the political appetite is there for a standalone bill.
So one other issue I want to bring up, and you mentioned a little bit before, Brad, and that's property taxes. Obviously, people still say they are too high in the state of Texas. We know that there is a $21 billion projected surplus. And so is there going to be a fight over how to reduce property taxes like we saw last year?
I don't think we'll see a fight quite like we did last year. Last year, we had these two competing visions on how to reform property taxes. On the one hand, the Senate side, homestead exemption increase. On the other hand, an appraisal cap for all real property. The homestead exemption increase won. The Senate won that fight. And I don't think anybody's really rearing for another clash like we saw last time around. But I have seen an increased number of bills filed to try and establish more appraisal cap, a limitation on appraisal increases. I think eventually that's something that, we have this quote circuit breaker in place for 3 years for certain small $5 million or less business property. I could see that kind of building down the road, maybe supplementing that.
I think Brad's right that there's just about everyone is motivated to not have sort of the endless special session, intractable drama that we had last summer. So I feel like the kind of the odds-on favorite right now is to have some combination of what we call compression, basically the state sending money to replace the local property tax burden for public schools, and also raising the homestead exemption a certain amount. I think the other question is just how much money goes into this, because again, it's a smaller surplus than last time. I think there is going to be a lot of pressure from some folks to put more money into an education savings account program than was on the table last time. So that's already a lot of cost when you're talking about water infrastructure, school choice, school finance, raises for teachers and whatnot. It's a big issue could just be simply how much of this money goes toward property tax relief.
Coming up, we'll discuss the race for Texas House Speaker, which continues to intensify and divide Republicans, when Eye on Politics comes right back. Welcome back to Eye on Politics. Now to the race for Texas House Speaker, the third most powerful position at the Capitol. The Speaker sets priority bills, can kill legislation, and assigns lawmakers to committees, among other things. Republicans are divided between Representative David Cook of Mansfield, who won the support by the House GOP caucus, and Representative Dustin Burrows of Lubbock, who was on outgoing Speaker Dave Phelan's leadership team. Burrows says he has the 76 votes required to win from some Republicans and Democrats. I discussed this with Brad Johnson of the Texan and Jasper Scherer of the Texas Tribune. How do you see this shaking out? Because the Texas House GOP caucus clearly is behind Representative Cook, and yet Representative Burrows has his share of Republicans, albeit less than Cook. So how do you see this shaking out? Jasper, we'll start with you.
One of the big questions right now is whether for Dustin Burrows, he's got this bipartisan coalition supporting him, and he's clearly trying to get more Republicans back on board, even get some Republicans on board who were never with him in the first place, and sort of create this air of inevitability. I think the mission for Burrows right now is to appeal to those Republicans and sort of create this sense that the train is leaving the station. You better get on board if you want to have any amount of influence in the House. I say it's a tougher challenge for Cook because he, I think there are a lot of Republicans who are kind of dug in against the wing of the party who is supporting Cook, and it's a tough sell for him to appeal to Democrats because a lot of what his his speakership bid is predicated on removing this tradition of power sharing with the minority party, not giving Democrats chairmanships.
He's absolutely right. This has turned into what used to be a very behind-the-scenes backroom contest, is turned into basically a statewide political campaign. All these texts going into various districts, trying to get voters ginned up either to put pressure on their representatives to support one candidate or the other, or oppose one or the other. This very much is a statewide political race, which is just, we haven't seen that before in this kind of contest. Ultimately, nobody has, as Jasper said, the public support right now to win the speakership. I think the biggest question is, can Dustin Burrows stomach a Democratic majority coalition backing him for speaker? That's going to invite a lot of PR problems for him, not just now, but throughout his entire speakership into the next primary, because members on the right flank of the party, the operatives on that part, they're chomping at the bit for another primary clash. They think they can take out more Republicans that they've been targeting for years. And so maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't, but that's going to be a problem that Burrows needs to contend with. And, I think right now, if push came to shove, he could have the gavel if he wanted right now, provided he will take that kind of coalition. But, it is a tall task to get what little Republicans there are on the fence over to his side. We saw him release a list of 38 Republicans, 38 Democrats, declaring he had the votes. That was very intentional, because he doesn't want a Democratic majority coalition. That just would invite so many problems. And then you had the fact that we saw a handful of members drop off, one Democrat, multiple Republicans, immediately after the list was released. So this thing, I have no idea how it's going to shake out.
We'll be watching. Coming up, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton says he's considering challenging Senator John Cornyn in a primary fight next year. We'll talk about it when Eye on Politics returns. Well, I know we just started 2025, but already there's talk about the 2026 election in Texas. Attorney General Ken Paxton says he's considering challenging Senator John Cornyn, who's up for re-election next year. More of my discussion with Jasper Scherer of the Texas Tribune and Brad Johnson of the Texan. We're going to be talking about the 2026 primary as soon as the legislative session ends, because candidates have to start ramping up their fundraising. And we've already seen the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton teasing a lot of Republicans as to whether he is going to challenge Senator John Cornyn, who is up for re-election in 2026. So what do you make of that? He said just last couple of weeks that he is considering this.
He's absolutely considering it. And, he did not get the U.S. Attorney General nomination. That was something he really was gunning for. And so this is, not exactly a consolation prize running for U.S. Senate, but, it's the rung right below. And he and Cornyn have fought it out for years now. Cornyn sent some pretty pointed tweets his way during impeachment, including a quote, "Hard to run from prison, Ken." Paxton is not forgetting that. And that will be the top theme of the primary if Paxton does run against Cornyn. But, Cornyn is no slouch himself. There's a lot of assuming that Paxton can get him if he wants it. And I don't know that that's true. This would be a very tight race, a very contested primary with a lot of money dumped in, especially on the Cornyn side. He can fundraise better than almost anybody else. And, his fave-unfave numbers are pretty good among the general electorate. Now, does that translate to the Republican primary? That's a totally different question.
All the public and private signals seem to be that Paxton's not only considering it, but kind of leaning in that direction. And I think it's worth mentioning too that the effect that this could have on some of these down ballot legislative races that we've just been talking about, if you have this kind of clash of the titans at the top, where it really magnifies this divide in the party, it would kind of crystallize that nicely in some ways to have the Paxton versus Cornyn at the top of the ballot. And I think that could just that could really help some of those folks on the rightmost wing in their mission to oust the sort of the boroughs supporting House members to continue moving the legislature to the right. If you've got this high profile battle at the top where Paxton himself is on the ballot challenging someone who the grassroots has seen for a while as someone a Senator John Cornyn, who they've seen as insufficiently conservative. I think that could really bleed down the ballot quite a bit.
I enjoyed our full conversation, and remember, you can watch it all on our YouTube channel. Just search CBS News Texas and click on the subscribe button. That's all for Eye on Politics this week. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jack Fink. I am listening, and we are listening to you at CBS News Texas. We'll see you next week, and from all of us here, have a great Sunday.